In October 2024, Demetrius Flannery, better known as Big Meech, one half of the duo brothers that started the cartel BMF or Black Mafia family, was released from prison 7 years early of his original 2031 date to a halfway home. His brother Southwest T was granted early release a couple years earlier in 2020. So technically the brothers are free, but if you've seen any of my videos on America's criminal justice system, that's far from free. It's still unclear how long Meech will have to remain in the halfway home. Beyond that, because of the stigma it carries, these men will be known as felons who once ran one of the most successful illegal drug organizations in America during the 2000s. Hailing out of Detroit, preceding other Detroit crews like the Chambers Brothers and YBI or Young Boys Incorporated, despite all taking different routes, it all ended the same. Long prison sentences, the loss of mostly black lives, and an extraction of black dollars to a few pockets that would eventually find its hands in the pockets of white-owned corporations through real estate, liquor, cars, jewelry, and lawyers. Much like Red Skull, who demanded the life be traded for Thanos to receive the Soul Stone, so it seems the streets demanded a trade. Not even a week after the news of Big Meech being released from prison, news broke of Lil Durk and fellow OTF or Only the Family affiliates arrest in federal case revolving around years-long rap turned street beef. That ended with loss of lives on both sides, and more likely than not, Durk and others who never achieved the same level of fame as him getting football number prison sentences. Now, I was born in 1990, meaning by the time BMF had become known to square hip-hop fans through Smack DVD interviews and through the other cultural events, and the FBI indictment happened, I was a high school kid. But I was around for the birth of drill rap. But BMF having ties to Detroit before the blow up made this an interesting story I wanted to dig into. So I reached out to my OG FD signifier, who was a college kid in Atlanta at the time. He was old enough to be outside during BMF influence on the culture.
I was outside. I didn't know it at the time because I was 18 coming from the suburbs of Chicago, right? But Big Meech had the world. Show this now. Let me make sure I ain't tripping.
No, the world is BMF's.
Yeah. You saw that coming into the city from the west side. And I'm like, what is BMF? And so this is that. I talk about this in the Diddy video. The early 2000s to me is the high point of hip hop's popularity and like showmanship. Like the music, I think, is better now and was better in the 90s. But in terms of how like big hip hop was, the stars, the money, the flashiness, the drugs, the alcohol, the women, the 2000s was it. So like I would come out my dorm room to go get some chicken fingers from the little corner, we had a place called Steagles, and like literally one day Scarface is sitting there, just there. I would go to the gym and walk past T.I. I would walk past T.I. going to a freshman girl dorm room. Like, T.I., what you doing here?
Right. Now, hopefully most people watching this never have to worry about being investigated by the feds, but it's a good chance you may have to deal with hackers. That's why I'm happy to be working with today's sponsor, Aura. This year has seen a number of high-profile data breaches, raising serious concerns about the personal information security. Dell suffered a breach that exposed 3.9 million customers' records, including sensitive personal information. United Health confirmed 100 million of their users had their data stolen, the largest ever healthcare data breach in the US. Finally, Ticketmaster experienced a massive breach compromising over 500 million customers' records. But most alarming of all, just a few months ago, National Public Data announced that they had suffered a major breach, potentially impacting every American. The incident compromised over 2.9 billion records used for background checks, including critical personal information such as full name, addresses, date of birth, phone numbers, and most importantly, social security numbers. It has been confirmed that members of the hacker group have released their sensitive information online for free. If you haven't already taken your personal information online seriously, now's the time to change that. You're more vulnerable than ever in today's digital landscape. Thankfully, I feel secure because I use Aura, today's sponsor. Aura monitors your personal data, including your social security number, across billions of data points like the dark web and public court records, to alert you about potential identity theft. They also provide up to $5 million in identity theft insurance in case the worst happens. I'm not leaving myself and my family vulnerable to data breaches, and if you don't want to either, you can go to aura.com/John Lewis to try 2 weeks for free. That'll be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal data is exposed. Now, this is more than just the average Kingpin video essay glamorizing a life most of us only see in movies and TV. This is a story that's bigger than BMF, Big Meech, and OTF. This is a story about the fall of a once great city and the rise of one that's not everything it promises to be. An examination into American wealth, crime, politics, and the black Mecca known as Atlanta. I'm John Lewis, and this is Big Meech and the Myth of Black Wakanda.
Meanwhile, the rest of the YNs that hang, as they call them, that hang around the city, they're not tapped into that. So they don't get the access to that. So they just trying to make it how they can. Most of them are making it still relatively fine, probably better than they would in a Detroit or, other places. But it ain't, Atlanta is not Wakanda. Every black person here ain't shining. Every black person here ain't doing it big. Every black person here ain't educated and progressive and all that stuff. It's a lot of fugazi, a lot of flexing, and a lot of people hoarding their resources and keeping strong borders between them and the black folks they feel like they don't want to be too connected to.
Part 1, Fall of an Empire. And now, I hate doing this, but they ran the numbers and it makes a huge difference when I ask, so hit that subscribe button. So this story of course starts in Detroit, but we gotta go back a few years before Big Meech and Southwest T was doing their thing. So their parents relocated to Detroit in 1968. Unfortunately, that was like finally getting to play in the NFL and your first game is guarding Calvin Johnson. For non-sports fans, his nickname was Megatron. Yes, like the evil robot from Transformers. See, the year earlier in 1967, one of the biggest uprisings in America happened in the city of Detroit. Leading up to this uprising that would forever change the city of Detroit. The city was once the crown jewel of America. In the 1950s, people flocked to the city for good paying union jobs in the auto industry and the economy that industry created. Around the 1950s, the population peaked at 1.8 million people. And black people was like, hold up now, we're paying equal wages to black and white folks? And that's part of the great migration that happens from the south to a lot of cities in the north and northeast. That builds a decent black middle class, but by 1967, what happens when every other city, when honest black folks come looking for honest work, and that's white flight. What crippled a lot of black cities' economy actually built modern Atlanta.
Atlanta didn't survive white flight. It's just that white flight created the opportunity for new Atlanta. Does that make sense?
Right.
Because Atlanta, as I'm sure you caught from the book, is very unique in that Atlanta had old money, and like real old money. Niggas is owning factories and textiles and what do I have to say, lingerie, real estate. I don't know where my brain is right now. Real estate companies, Bronner Brothers, hair companies. There's so much black entrepreneurship and industry in Atlanta. Who's gonna fly? No, we here. Like that old money is here, and so that creates established frameworks that black folks were able to always hold on to whenever shit got rough. Now the problem was those folks, Negroes with money, were able to hold on. The rest of the Negroes were flushed to different areas. Coming to the Olympics, when they started tearing down projects, it was a wrap. But because you have that old money plus the AUC, the Atlanta University Center, Clark, Morehouse, Spelman, Morris Brown low-key dead, but it's still there technically. You have a constant influx of black petite bourgeois educated people coming into the city, going to college, and then replenishing that working class to owner bourgeois class of black folks that you don't have anywhere else. Like in DC's a chocolate city, but all you got is Howard. And DC is too old of a city that you don't have that same framework of like this old black money. Well, we got that in Atlanta. And so Atlanta remains black for now, but the black folks that were there in the same way that the Detroit folks were there, those folks are definitely gone. Right now, if you roll through parts of Atlanta that are all black and you ask people where they're not from Atlanta. I would say if I meet 10 black people today, 3 of them will be from Atlanta. I got a black dude that owns a coffee shop, old Hotep dude, he from New York. I got the principal, she from Charlotte. of my kids' school, every black person that's getting money and doing their thing and looking good in Atlanta that I see on a regular basis, I can go through my whole day without touching or talking to a white person if I wanted to and get everything I need done. But 90% of them people are not gonna be from here. My only person from Atlanta is my physical therapist. You know what I'm saying? And she don't live in Atlanta, she live in Marietta.
But see, that's the thing. It's only so many jobs at the auto plants. But this influx of people built other jobs, small family businesses, etc., etc. The black population got uncomfortably high. Malcolm X had been assassinated in 1965. The Vietnam War was going on, and police department was 95% white in the city. All of this came to a head when police broke up a party at the Blind Pig, an after-hours joint holding a coming home party for a black veteran that fought in Vietnam. As cops tend to do, it was a real life version of whack-a-mole, except this time with niggas. And all out hell broke out for 5 days, loss of a lot of lives and millions of dollars. That scared off even more white folks and businesses, turning Detroit into a shell of itself. It left burnt out buildings that would take decades to be repaired, loss of tax dollars, fear crime, and they also blamed the people for their reaction of decades of injustices by the police force. A year later, the Flannery family arrives in 1968, just in time for Big Meech to be born and his little brother, Southwest T, 2 years later. This was no longer the Detroit of the past, but their pops did honest work while still they struggled. Things would get worse. It's now 1973, America's facing an oil crisis thanks to some Middle East politics with Israel, the Arab owning oil countries. All you need to know is the price of a barrel of oil increased by 4 times, and the price of gas to the consumer doubled. And the once small companies like Toyota and Honda, the big American companies never took serious, were taking customers thanks to their smaller, fuel-efficient cars. This being Detroit, that affected the entire economy. So if you was poor in the 70s, you was poor after all this happened. But as young kids, they probably didn't even realize the family was poor, but it's now 1981. Another important date in the story. See, Sir Lucifer himself, better known as Ronald Reagan, had just smashed the air traffickers union for striking over better wages and working conditions. And this with the rise of automation in factories and globalization, and soon the jobs inner city black folks would get with just a high school diploma were scarce. Even auto manufacturing moved lots of jobs overseas. A weird coincidence with the US to stop the Iran and Contra war, coke is somehow flooding black neighborhoods at much lower wholesale prices. It's a hustler's dream. Everyone from Larry Hoover in Chicago, who would through a few generations lead the South Side Chicago's gang culture in OTF, Only the Family, to every urban city with few legit chances like Detroit to make legal money. It's now the mid-1980s. The Flannery parents are divorced. Times are even harder. Now the men Meech and T you look up to are the dope boys, driving new cars, nice clothes, and wearing gold jewelry. So you can see how a city like 1980s Detroit entraps young black men in this life. Eventually, Meech is able to get him some work. Him and T started moving $50 bags of coke. Just so it's clear how fast they turned their fortune around. $50 in 1985 is $150 in 2024 money. And the Hustling Brothers was doing all day shits. As much crime and destruction as it caused, it can also be argued for some communities, this influx of blow actually caused a trickle-down effect of wealth. Unlike what the pull yourself up by your bootstrap folks tells us will happen if we just all be good blacks and go to school, which FD argues himself is very limited.
So Atlanta's similar. If you working in the banking industry, if you're working in the tech industry, if you're working in the entertainment industry as a black person in Atlanta, there's ways you can open doors to other black people, but you're 9 times out of 10 gonna open a door to somebody with the same background as you. You're not gonna open a door to someone from around the way too tough. You're not gonna open a door to someone from the mud like that. It's always gonna be another HBCU grad. You know what I'm saying? That you know from your fraternity or your, cousin's niece that just moved here. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's not really trickling down, it's circulating. Because that's what it's always been with them too. Like trickle economics was always circulating economics. And then you flick a couple of boogers out that everybody else would run to.
See, the plug they had was at such a low price and good quality, they became very successful. And like Frank Lucas was told, that success took a shot at them. It could have been someone they put out of business, someone they slighted by messing with the same women. It could have just been someone who didn't like that they had the crown. It's so many parallels between the actual dope game where it's known You play by street rules in the entertainment industry, where the street guys run into entertainment that wanted to escape the streets, or just straight up playing the role the same way John Wick is a character, and that ultimately led to the fall of OTF and Lil Durk. See, at the height of his popularity, BMF was a cartel of hustlers playing as entertainers for at least tax purposes, while OTF and its affiliates and a number of other rappers who I would call young, but then realize all these guys are like 30 plus, and they were all street dudes cosplaying as rappers. While similar situations may have created these men who went down the path of crime, the generation divide gave different incentives. While I'm not as familiar with street politics, and a city like Detroit never had actual gangs like GDs, BDs, Damus, or Lokes, it was also different crews. But especially in the 80s and 90s, with the 50 Boys starting off, the purpose was to move that work and just get paid. And yes, because of figures in the 80s like Larry Hoover, Chicago was and is different in the street politics. But with Ronald Reagan and Oliver North were running weapons to the Contras, and just by coincidence, pure coke was hitting every major black city, getting rocked up and creating the blueprint for the government's war on black bodies disguised as the war on drugs. At the minimum, it made some of those in the streets a whole lot of money, and some, better than they would have working a minimum wage job. See, where making dough was the goal, and the violence that comes from it was a byproduct of the 80s and 90s. By the time we get to the 2010s, to cities like Chicago, laws have been updated, the quality and amount brought in has really been reduced. That now all we have is the poverty, broken home, destroyed communities, and young men who were born in the wrong generation. And what we have left is the genre the blog era named drill rap. While Chief Keef can be seen as the pioneer of it and had a couple big hits, much like early figures in traditional rap such as Curtis Blow, no way could he have seen it becoming as big as it is, or would he be a part of the scene and the fortune it made. Whether you like his music or not, it is a fact that Auto-Tune Durk was the most successful out of the Chicago drill scene. And I won't lie, the last year of his career, King Von was showing a type of growth that would have reached such heights as Durk's Grammy nominations and wins as a mentor. But much like BMF, where street dudes cosplaying as rappers, promoters, and industry executives, it was a similar situation with Durk, Von, and OTF, except they didn't have the luxury of the free market and prime money-making years. So they were just street dudes with real beef that looked into the entertainment industry. Unfortunately, these young men were so deep in, it was almost impossible to leave that side behind, especially living a life where so many loved ones lost lives to the graves or prison cell before 30. Big Meech, being the polar opposite of his brother Terry, who preferred to get money and stay out of the light, didn't help. See, it's 1980s Detroit, and only people making real money in black were hustlers. Even in the NBA and NFL, it wasn't more than a handful of players making $1 million a year from their sports contracts. According to many interviews from Big Meech, by the time he was 15 or 16, he had made his first $1 million. Combine that with everything that comes with that life, egos, taking other dealers' business, and street beef, and wanting to be known that he was the one making money in his city, a target was on him and his brother back. A whole lot of violence happens from different factors. Meech and his brother T make a business decision, and they leave Detroit. T would do his thing in LA, Meech would eventually land in Atlanta as his main stomping ground. It had already been a foundation laid out, and by the early 2000s, even more legit companies would be arriving.
There is, I think it was 2004, 2005, under Mayor Kasim Reed, cut a bunch of corporate deals, not just with Disney, but with all these different corporations that have made it a very corporately owned city. And so not only is it where Disney's filming here on a regular basis, and 75 different reality shows and Walking Dead and all these things are all filming here, and there is a burgeoning industry that's ununionized. So we'll see what happens if and when they try to unionize, because that's one of the reasons why we're attractive. It's not just the tax break, it's also because they don't have to deal with unions when they come here to do everything else. Right. So the industry is like kind of a bubble. That bubble breaks, I don't know what's gonna happen to a lot of motherfuckers. And then on top of the movie industry, which again, Disney props up a lot, it's also, Microsoft just got here, Tesla's building plants, Kia's building plants, Home Depot, Coca-Cola, Google, everybody's got a stake here because it's the city is a valuable gateway just for all these different reasons. It's still relatively cheap. Like comparing the city of Atlanta and Atlanta Metro to, I just came from Charlotte and I was shocked that Charlotte costs more to live than Atlanta still. I don't know how that is. I don't know what we're doing, but like it's still cheap compared to Atlanta in a lot of places, not everywhere. So, you know, I don't want to completely like poo-poo that there aren't opportunities here. It's just, if you come in here with a dream and a bag, you know, you better have a plan before you get on that train because you're gonna be rudely awakened.
Now, I'm gonna tell y'all right now, I'm not Trap Lord Ross or DJ Academics or any of them. I don't take joy in telling these types of stories, especially being from Detroit. These are people and families that have lost loved ones. The drug game has destroyed people's lives, created addicts. We still see that fallout 30 years later. But this is to show how it's all related, and America creates these situations and traps that some see hustling as the only way out. In 1990, with the 50 boys who would eventually become BMF left Detroit to make connections that would turn them into one of the most lucrative black cartels of the 21st century. What they left was a majority black city with corrupt police, warring hoods, and crews that all want the crown as the biggest dealer in the city. And it's at this point in every movie and documentary that's either fact or fiction, the audience asks, why not just walk away completely? With the money you made, you survived many near-death situations. Well, ironically, like the product they sell, it's an addiction. The allure of the game, the thrill of moving enough powder to make Bruno Mars blush. Walking in a spot with bundles of cash, everyone in the street knowing your name. But more than that, when you came up like they did, they never wanted to go back to being those broke kids riding on the bus with holes in their shoes. Besides, this is America. Behind every great fortune is a great crime. Allegedly, the Kennedy family bootlegged liquor during Prohibition. Coke did build up Miami into what it is today. We've all seen the movie Casino, how those mob guys were able to wash money through Vegas. They actually would have gotten away with it for a lot longer if it wasn't for the short guy making a block hot. And that takes us to chapter 2. The casino is dead.
Here's a key argument here. The reason why black capitalism, no matter what, won't work is because capitalism is intrinsically white, and white people don't fuck with niggas. Right. Period. You can't the reason why they couldn't do it. So so let's be clear. Hood drug kingpin type dudes have been running the rap game for years, but they would get the artists beforehand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They would be Murder, was it Ty Murder for Murder Inc?
Okay. Well, BMF, they wanted to sign Jeezy, but by the time they got to him, he was already Jeezy.
Yeah, yeah. So it's like you got to get them. The other people that have done it successfully, they get the dude early, and then it's a seamless thing. And if they get big, you watch the money, yada yada yada. They got their drug money real big and was out here outside crazy before they went to sign anyone. So if I'm Jeezy, who was a small time, hustler himself in Savannah, it's another thing. Savannah's like 3 hours from Atlanta, but Savannah is hood though. Let's be real. Parts of Savannah.
That's crazy because so many people was like me. I associated Jeezy with Atlanta. I didn't know he wasn't from Atlanta.
No, he's not. He's from Savannah. He might even Macon, in fact, which is it's still hood, but like it's like literally like 3 blocks. But anyway, like so the only way that can work is if they get a Ludacris. Because white people like Ludacris. If they get a T.I. at the time, white people like T.I., Outkast, etc. Then you're washing your money because your product is now being disseminated amongst white people. You can't make enough money off of niggas to have the system actually function. Because when people say, oh, the black dollar doesn't circulate enough and that's because there's not enough places for it to go. Before it leaves. It's just not. We don't own car dealerships. We don't own tech companies. We don't own grocery stores. You know what I'm saying? We don't own Uber Eats. Not the place you get the Uber food from, Uber Eats. And so when we don't own those things, if you're trying to launder money or capitalism through just our section, again, shout out to Dr. Ball with the Black Buying Power book, you're always going to end up having to go outside to really get your bag. You're gonna have to go outside community. And Blue Da Vinci wasn't going no fucking where. Yeah, and if I'm Ludacris and I see, like, I party with y'all niggas, but I see what y'all niggas is doing, no, I'm not running with y'all too tough because I'm gonna get on the Fed list.
Let me mention a few names for you. Kwame Kilpatrick, and Eric Adams. The former was the youngest elected mayor of Detroit, who would eventually be convicted of mad crimes and sentenced to 26 years in prison. The latter is currently on a press run at black churches as he's being investigated for such crimes as taking bribes from Turkey officials, and most likely will be serving time in prison eventually. If you black and watch this, you either being told directly or learned in life, you can't do what them white folks do. Rather that's at work while being pulled over by the police or, in this case, crime. Sure, in a perfect world, a corrupt black mayor would be able to take bribes and strong-arm contractors just like every other politician. But sorry, champ, this ain't The Wire where Clay Davis wins at trial. Now, if the FBI ran down on Eric Adams' bald head, no facial hair having ass, what do you think is going to happen when a bunch of street niggas with dope money moving louder than an SUV in 2010 with two 15-inch subwoofers?
So this is also the height of Southern hip hop. When
Right.
BMF, you know, you can't give them all the credit because it was good music being made, right? But as BMF is becoming BMF, you're also seeing Ludacris, T.I., Jeezy, Gucci, you know, still Outkast to an extent. So many Southern rappers, and then all the one-hit wonders, D4L, Franchise
Right.
Boys, Party Like a Rockstar dudes. I don't remember their names. So I think Atlanta's got like in Miami, I don't know how many black strip clubs they got. I know they got King of Diamonds. I don't know if they got much else. I'm sure there's some dope black strip clubs in Memphis or something, but I don't think I think Atlanta's a black strip club mecca of the world because you have Strokers, Magic City, Blue Flame. Now you have Onyx. Onyx wasn't around back then. Back then it was the Gold Room, or the Gold Club. They might have invented it because they were so in it. You know what I mean?
Right.
If one of the BMF dudes wasn't the first dudes to do it, then they were there when it happened and then repeated it the next night. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like a chicken or the egg situation.
Yes, they called themselves the Black Mafia family, but BMF was just a cartel, a very lucrative cross-country cartel, but a cartel nonetheless. See, at its height, the Italian Mafia was a group of families with organized rules, laid out territory that tried its best to stay out of the light. And even with that, the run only lasted about 50 years before old Uncle Sam created RICO laws specifically made for them and heavier sentencing to make them a shell of themselves. Now, if YouTube did its job pushing this out to the group I want, like a lot of you, I love a good mob or gangster flick. Godfather, Goodfellas, Scarface, Casino, American Gangster, or in the words of 50 Cent, America got a thing for this gangster shit. And if you play it right, you can flip some of that into legitimate money. I'm not one of these old heads that's gonna sit here and preach to you about music and movies is a bad influence and blah, blah, blah. I still love some ignorant music to ride around or work out to. If I was old enough, I probably would have been to some of those parties.
I went to, my homeboy won a contest where he got to perform with Killer Mike, right? At a small show with Killer Mike. And that same night, Bone Crusher debuted Never Scared. And like, I remember freaking the hell, I had never heard anything like that in my life. We picked up this girl that's a Delta. She's a Delta now. We picked her up and threw her like wrestling style into the crowd. She got caught, landed, stood up, and started throwing bowls like nothing happened. Like that's how, like I always want to be honest. Ask me like all the bad things that BMF and the crime people did, like later. In the moment, it was a fucking vibe.
Yeah.
And I'm not even an outside type of dude. I spent half that time playing Zelda in Final Fantasy X. But when I left the crib, when I put the controller down, it was as you say, it was crunk out there. It was crunk up in this thing. You know what I'm saying? So it was a wild time.
We've all seen the movie Casino. Mob money helped to build the city in its early days, but just to get in those rooms, shake those hands, make those moves, hire legit guys to get your crew in, it only worked because Italians are white. Yes, at one time in America, Italians were second-class citizens, but with enough time and money, throw on a suit, nice watch, Gucci loafers, and it's just another white guy. In the capitalist country, it's just assumed that a group of white men in a boardroom driving nice cars to gated community homes after work are legit. Same as when the mob controlled most of the construction unions in New York and New Jersey. You might not know exactly what the Teamsters Union does or who Jimmy Hoffa was, but I bet you know those names. You see, In all these industries, at certain levels, it's just assumed you gotta grease a few hands and make some deals. But these people helping each other out, not trying to let no black people in the club and build real wealth. Capitalism can only work and survive with racism, and it was decided black people are going to be the second class group in America to achieve this. Oh, what about Miami? It's a bunch of Latinos down there, right? That was moving major coke in the 70s to 80s. Well, we already established that the casino was closed. They not letting a bunch of dreadhead brothers in that way. So it's always this hope that street guys can flip their money into legitimate business. I mean, that's what built modern Miami, right? According to the guy Billy Corbin, basically Miami historian at this point and director of Cocaine Cowboys, whose research I used for this section, in the 1970s and 80s, coke made up 1/3 of Miami's economy. 1/3 of all homes were paid for in cash. Around 25,000 legitimate jobs were created in the city during the peak era. Now, I understand it's a very complicated situation when it comes to Cubans. It's a whole history I can't get into. Tons of colorism, you know the usual. But we have to acknowledge white passing Cubanness, proximity to whiteness, and being involved with smuggling and what made all of this possible. But just like the Italian mob in Vegas and New York, once the crime got out of hand, law clamped down and pushed them out of the groundwork once it had been built. And just so it's clear, BMF was indicted in 2005 after a 15-year investigation by the FBI. Meaning basically from the time the brothers moved out of Detroit into other cities, the feds had been watching them. You know what's scarier than the FBI? The IRS. They can take everything and worry about the arrests and charges later. I know I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but Meech was moving like the late Nicky Barnes. This actually caused a major rift between him and his brother. But let's just say things had gone slightly different. Instead of throwing money all around, they just used BMF Entertainment as a front. Well, first off, Meech had around 13 different mansions, some paid for, some rented. Countless cars, then all of the guys affiliated were living at just as flashy. And I don't know how to say this delicately, but you can only wash so much money when Blue DaVinci is your only artist. And as a rapper, probably nobody under the age of 30 even knows who he is. Like, come on guys, really? I know Atlanta has a lot of black millionaires and rappers and athletes love to party there, but there's only so much legal money to be made in entertainment. Then on top of that, all the shootouts that was tied to them. Feds estimated it was around 500 members at its peak. Eventually, someone who doesn't make invisible car money is going to snitch after getting arrested. And by 2005, the party was over. Feds had enough to charge everyone. The ripple effect was children losing parents, spouses losing loved ones, and hundreds of years combined in prison sentences for all of those men. All for what? A narcotic that's lower quality and more dangerous than when they were running the streets. I'm extremely pro-prison reform. I can't say abolition because guys like Puffy and Jeffrey Epstein need to be away from society. Get mad at me in the comments all you want, but I'm also pro-legalizing all narcotics. If you're watching this video, chances are you know of a musician or entertainer that's lost their life to a drug overdose. Now, what if we created a government agency that would oversee all drugs, make sure what you get is what you buy, you don't have to go to sketchy areas or have people pull up to your home, and we don't have cops beating niggas like piñatas during a traffic stop because they found one pill. Now, what if I told you that already exists? Yeah, the DEA. See, about a century or so ago, alcohol prohibition ended up causing so much crime, the government threw in a towel, yada yada, a bunch of laws, and we get the ATF, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency. Someone please tell me why we don't have that for products adults are still want to use and buy anyway. Instead, we get a forever war on drugs that's ravaged communities, replaced the money that was being made with YouTube views from drill songs. The few promising careers cut short because of the grave or prison, and everything all this brings. I'm not going to pretend like I'm better than y'all, because I was bumping records like Back in Blood and Why He Told by King Von. But at the end of the day, it's all entertainment for me. One thing we need to realize when we talk about these people, these aren't movie characters. Their actions have consequences. Some people sold every item of value they had for one more hit of what BMF was selling. When the mob was at full strength, they extorted people and those in their own community they claimed to protect. OTF was only the family, but we know all of these organizations ended with snitching and betrayal. Besides all of the time lost and families destroyed, stray bullets to those not involved, these aren't just stories for our entertainment to watch on here like an MCU movie breakdown. And if you all want more videos like this, please support me and others like me who don't treat these stories like YouTube drama. Sign up for my Patreon because I have an editor to pay and I want to keep educating and entertaining you. I'm also going to drop a video I made a couple years ago that shows the side of prison most of these bigger channels leave out. That'll be in the description. Y'all think you can get me to what, 100,000 subs in 90 days? I also really need to grow my Patreon because I have videos I want to do in the future that I will need to travel for to give you all on-site interviews and tours. Do what you can, but the best way to support me is buy me a coffee or my Patreon, and also make sure to subscribe. All links are below. I'm John Lewis, and I'm out.